Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the L&D Leadership League 30-minute masterclass on enhancing portability of talent, supporting leaders in transition. I'm Shashi from People Matters and would take you through the agenda for today's masterclass. First of all, I would like to give you a brief on the L&D Leadership League. L&D Leadership League is an initiative which is specially designed for the L&D leaders, helping them take talent management to the next level. This league is a combination of bunch of activities like the newsletters, master classes, learning week, half-day events, full-day content, and awards. Just to give you a brief on today's masterclass. This masterclass will focus on enhancing portability of talent, supporting leaders in transition. Earlier, leaders moved vertically up the hierarchy. Few companies promoted the practice of leaders getting regular cross-functional experiences or cross-regional experiences. Today, the situation has changed further. It is not only about transitions within an organization, but it is also about global shifts. Indian multinationals have their leaders moving into roles of all continents. Estimates of all outright failure in the first 18 months range from 38% to over half. There is a strong need to support our leaders in such a way that we set them up for the success. We will be sharing some stories of people who have made these transitions and how they were supported. The approach for this topic would be, what can we do to support leaders in transition and how? Plan through variety of leadership transitions and their importance. Through storytelling, discuss elements of leadership transition success. To present this session, we have the privilege of having with us Kaushik Gopal. Kaushik heads coaching practices for Center for Creative Leadership, APAC. Kaushik's career as a psychologist spans over 30 years. Kaushik worked on diagnosing, designing, and delivering solutions that focus on the relation between people as well as between people and products. As a consultant, he has had significant exposure to the sectors like chemical, automobile, farm equipment, fertilizer, business process outsourcing, consulting, pharmaceuticals, banking, and many more. He has also worked in depth with individuals and groups from the government and voluntary sectors. The sponsors for today's webinar for helping us make this program possible are Center for Creative Leadership, Pearson Talent Lens, Sum Total Systems of Skillsoft Company, Great Lakes Institute of Management, and Wilson Learning. We have saved time for you to ask your questions at the end of the masterclass. For those watching the live masterclass, you can submit questions at any time during the presentation through the Q&A section. We will try to respond to as many questions as time allows. We have a full exciting agenda for the masterclass today. So without any further delay, I am going to hand over the microphone to Kaushik. Over to you, Kaushik.
Thank you, Shashi. That's a very glowing introduction, and welcome to everybody on the call. It's lovely to be with all of you and in this virtual space, and quite a privilege to be able to speak to all of you. I am actually at this point of time based in Singapore, but have just come here to India for spending the rest of about 2 weeks here now, and I'm going to be taking the call from here. The broad area that I look after includes Southeast Asia, East Asia, South Asia, as well as we've recently added on Australia as part of our working space in Asia Pacific. And so I look forward to this period of engaging with all of you and taking discussion on this area, which is really quite fascinating. And, we've been thinking a lot about this, and I thought I'd really share some thoughts about this with all of you and open, once to some questions post this. A couple of years back, actually, what happened was that there was an Indian organization that reached out to us, and they've been doing a lot of work with us in different areas as far as leadership development is concerned. And they got into a conversation with us about, how can we support our leaders who are, being moved from one particular place, to another. And they were large conglomerate, multi-businesses, multi-billion-dollar, overall size of the enterprise. And they've got interests actually in South America, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Australia, in Southeast Asia, and so on. And they had this whole belief, that what is the best thing that we can do in supporting people? Because it's not just somebody who's doing well. Let's say in India, a very high potential person has learned quickly, clearly proven himself, and now has been promoted. And, they said that, okay, we want to send this person off to, some places, let's say Brazil. But we are concerned that we would like to be able to support that person, do the best that we can. So that's how this conversation initially began. And we have since been working across probably, I'm looking at about 13 of these transition supports that we've been actually working with. So it's very focused support that is involved, and the early as we're looking at the results of this whole thing, it's very positive, and it seems that we are definitely on the right track. So I just wanted to share some of those lessons of experience with all of you. Right. So the key pieces in this entire thing are, one is that we need to look at the background. And as far as the background is concerned, the reality is that talent is not limitless at all. In fact, many conversations that I've had with people in India as well as outside India is that the kind of people that they're looking for is always in short supply. And it's not just that you can dip into, some in the source and get the right people. And this is by and large, even if you look at a place like Singapore, for instance, you can see that a large number of the people, of the population, in fact, who are there, I would estimate that at upwards of 1 million people in a population which is totaling about 5.3 million. Are from other countries. So you can imagine how much of this porting, is actually taking place. And you need to really tap into, various sources, right? Sometimes when you're looking at, picking up people from the outside, of course, it becomes very much more expensive. People might not know the organization and so on. So that's one of the factors that's there in the background. Second one is around the fact that organizations grow. Whether you like it or not, growth is happening. For instance, the story about the organizations that I told you about, it might have grown from a very small operation, a trading company, to something which has got its multi-billion-dollar, multi-locational, multi-product, multi everything. So there's a huge amount of growth that's taking place, and that growth is not only within India, but they're actually growing outside. There are telecom companies that have got huge interest in Africa, for example. People are growing into various parts of Southeast Asia. The other day I was working with an organization, again an Indian company, that had interest in Northern Europe. So it's interesting that it's all over the place. And the need, the second most important thing that we have over here is the organization need. And you want to be able to make the, what people call, the fungibility of talent. And fungibility is basically, the same thing. You want to be able to port talent. You want to be able to move people from one place to another place. You want to move somebody from, let's say, Mumbai all the way to, let's say, Rio or to Perth or to a place, let's say, Jakarta. And you need to be able to prove, obviously you're not going to give that to everybody, but only the people who you know are the ones who are likely to succeed, who are, obviously they have proven themselves as talent within the organization. Now, the key elements that we need to look at, is that we have to, first of all, ensure in whatever way we can that this entire thing is successful. And it's not necessarily so. There's research that has been done in this space also. But we have to essentially ensure success. Just today itself, I was talking to a leader within the financial services sector, and they believe a lot in this fungibility of talent. And so they've been using it. And I was just sort of, asking that person, the head of HR, that what is the approximate success rate that you guys have? And he was looking at about 12 people within the last about a year that they had, put into different roles within the larger space, and there was a certain amount of porting which was taking place. And he was counting on his fingers. He said, 1, 2, 3. About 3 people weren't as successful as we would have wanted them to be. So, pretty good. That means that's what I would call a really good statistic. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is the fact that the 70-20-10 principle. And this is something that several of you may have heard about. It's based on CCL's very old, it's about a 20-year plus old research study, which is actually continuing in various forms even now. And it's called the 70-20-10 framework. Essentially what happened in this particular approach was that leaders were asked that, what is it in your experiences that has really contributed to your success as a leader? So they were meant to narrate their experiences. And the second question that they were asked is that, if you look back at those experiences that were critical, what lessons did you learn from those experiences? And when they content analyzed all that data, what they found essentially was that 70% of the learning that leaders had came from challenging experiences. 20% came from having conversations with significant people in your life, like conversations with bosses, with mentors, with coaches, with significant people. Those were things that added 20% to their learning, and 10% came from what is known as codified learning, which is typically classroom learning. So you can't do all forms of learning through the classroom. You have to balance that whole thing out. So that's something that we keep in mind when we are structuring the whole process of learning and supporting leaders in that as we're porting them. The third aspect of the key elements is really around this area of the key competencies that are involved here. And those are, self-awareness is a very critical part of the whole thing, because there needs to be an awareness and openness people have to really learning about themselves. And you find often people who stop having that openness themselves because they feel that they've reached there, they've arrived, and they're not open anymore to learning, And there's a relationship also between self and awareness and the third thing that you see here called learning agility. You'll find that, that's one of the other critical competencies, which is around, how quickly can I learn? So knowing about oneself as well as learning. Many years ago, when this whole process of globalization was picking up, we had organizations that actually asked CCL at that time to really look at this whole thing of supporting their leaders when they were going from one country to another. So at that time, we had actually created a 360, which looked at these two areas in learning agility, which was learning to learn and learning to lead. And it was particularly applicable to people who were going into new territories and so on. And the second thing over here is that of communication and, the ability to communicate in across, all different kinds of people, interpersonally, not only interpersonally, but, one to sometimes large groups. And communication is fascinating because you particularly see this happening when you're going from one culture to another culture. And, for example, when I was doing a lot of work in China, I found that when you're communicating with people in China, you've got to be very precise in your communication. The tolerance for ambiguity is very low. Whereas in, when you're communicating in India, for instance, that need for specificity and precision is much lower. People can tolerate much higher degrees of ambiguity. And the other piece here is that of influence. And what is involved over here is this whole thing of stakeholders and the importance of being able to understand who the stakeholders are and to be able to, in a sense, understand who, which are the critical people that I would need to influence and work with. So, these are some of the key elements in the whole process that one needs to keep in mind. Then I want to go on to this whole thing of the challenge and what is the response to that challenge. Okay, so essentially the first challenge that we have is what worked earlier may not work now, and so this is really around this whole thing of when you're looking at high potential people. And, what got them to a particular place may not be the thing that's going to actually ensure their success in the future, and it will not necessarily take them to their next level. And therefore, one of the things, our response to that entire thing is we need to ensure that the person who is going to be moved has got a very high ability to learn. And so it's one of the key things that we really stress. And another thing that we stress as a part of this is the whole process of immersion in the new system. And that immersion essentially means that I can soak in and I can take in and I can start processing whatever is coming inside. And I can begin to see things from not only my perspective, but I can see things from others' perspectives. And there is a natural respect that is actually, part of that whole thing. So that is, and awareness of how best we learn, which I've touched on already. The second challenge is that the failure rate can be very high. It can be as high as 50%. And therefore, we need to be able to do some very specific things. So what we've essentially put down is that the structure of the entire process has to be very clear. And, so in the structure, we need to look at the whole process. We need to factor in some time for immersion. And we also need to factor in time for what are the clear deliverables going to be that has to be focused on. The leader that is being ported from one place to another needs to be prepared really thoroughly. Communication to that leader needs to be thorough in terms of setting that person up right from the beginning. The third thing that we need to look at, we need to keep in mind that we need to look at the mentoring and the coaching piece. And I would differentiate these two things. The mentoring process is in many ways a broader one that is going to ensure that that person is going to be successful within that role. The coaching process is more performance-oriented and much more, you have an outsider from the organization, who is typically going to work with you and in a very objective way. But the mentor could be somebody from within the organization, that person is going to be working with. And very often what happens is that it's a good idea to start with the coaching and then to start looking at, who the best mentor is likely to be. And the mentoring also goes on after the coaching process takes place. The fourth thing that we need to keep in mind, is in order to deal with this whole failure rate, bring it as low as possible, is the stakeholder alignment and the expectations, that they have, and regular check-ins with all the stakeholders. And this can be, when we recently were working with an organization that sent one of its leaders into Perth in Australia, into a mining company over there. What we found was that the tendency was that, okay, I'll work with the key stakeholders, but seemed to be those people who were immediately within that space. And what that leader was not looking at was what about the people in the back home environment, the peers over there. The others, including L&D, including HR, who were also needing, to have constant, insight as to what was taking place. So it's important to understand all the, stakeholders concerned and understand also what each of their expectations is. Finally, what we also need to keep in mind is that we need to spend some time on integrating that new person within his immediate team, his or her immediate team. So the idea is to create, a space where there's a solid alignment which takes place between the team leader and the rest of the team. Okay. Now, the framework, I want to share with you a framework that essentially we have, which really looks at three critical things. We're looking at results, we're looking at processes, and we're looking at success factors. And the larger thing is, around what we call executive integration. And this is, the word has been used by our global head of coaching. His name is Doug Riddle, and he has published this as a white paper, which is available on our website as well. It's on executive integration. And so we'll go into this in some detail, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but I'm just going to take you through some critical parts of this entire thing, right? So just a sec. Okay, so first of all, when you look at this whole issue of the results, you're looking at, a couple of things over here. The executive, he needs to develop credibility. That's a very important aspect of the whole thing. And he needs to be able to set direction, gain alignment, and inspire commitment. And these are outcomes that you will know that, okay, the whole process has been successful if these results take place, okay? There are certain critical processes also that need to be focused on, and those are that the person needs to learn the situation, first of all. He needs to diagnose what the opportunities are. He needs to plan to succeed. He needs to be able to engage others in the whole process. He needs to implement plans, and then finally get back to reassessing what needs to be done. Now, the mastery is really around the critical success factors, which is there are some things that you see in the inner circle which need to be looked at. And fundamentally, these things are around, the job and the organization, that is the scope. The whole area of people, that is relationship, as well as the person needs to develop mastery in what is the politics of this organization. What is the culture like? What are the unwritten rules that are operating inside this place? And there are various kinds of unwritten rules. I mean, when you have a person going from, let's say, India into the Philippines, and we've had a recent, executive who's working with on this. There's lots of unwritten rules that operate over there, and the person had actually, for example, let's say, when you have an Indian leader who goes from one place to another, one of the pieces of feedback that we've got consistently is that Indian leaders have a tendency of being a little hierarchical. They have a more telling approach. They talk down to people, and they don't really bring people and align people with them. And these are actual stories, that have come. And, so more and more what you need to do is understand what that culture is. What are the critical expectations, that people would have, and what are some of those unwritten rules that are there. And within that space, you have to also look at what is that unique contribution that I can make. Right. So I know that I've spoken, non-stop for this amount of time, and I'm going to keep some time right now for you all to have some questions and answers, and let's see where we can take this entire discussion. So I'm going to open the chat, and let's see what we have.